Shalom Ahim, I will do tefillah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiteshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu ad brit Torah. Blessed are you, Eternal, our Elohim, Sovereign of the universe, that has sanctified us with your commandments and has ordained us in respect for the studies of your word of the Torah. Shalom again, Ahim. This is the continuation to the studies of AliYAH number 6 and 7 from tzaria and Metzora by Dr. Roy Carlos Reyes International Ministries, restoring the house of Israel. Hallelujah. Let us continue. Actually, let's start again from Leviticus chapter 15, verse 16 through 28. And it says like this, verse 16, and if a man has the emission of semen, he shall bathe his whole body in water, and he shall be unclean until evening. Verses 2 through 15 deal with the case of Zav man, who is unclean because of the discharge that comes out of his virile member, without having the emission of semen. From verse 16 onward, the Torah gives instruction about one who has seminal emission. The emission of semen produces a state of tame in the man, but at a lower level than that of Zav. The Torah says that the man who has semen emission will have to bathe his entire body in water in order to be purified at sunset. The Hebrew word that has been translated bathe is rahatz, which means washing, bathing, cleansing, doing ablutions, purifying with water. 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 10 and 14. Now, if he uses any water to wash himself, he will not be purified, since the water would be unclean by touching the one who is tameh. We have seen in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 36, that the only water that cannot become unclean is that which is in a mikveh, composed of a natural fountain and a pit. Therefore, the only water that serves to wash away impurity is the water of mikveh with these characteristics. Many rivers and lakes are suitable for purification. John chapter 3, verse 22 and 20 through 23. This verse says that the whole body, literally all its flesh, has to be bathed in water. Leviticus chapter 11, verse 32 teaches that objects that are introduced into the water of a mikveh are purified. From this we deduce that it is necessary that the one who is purified should be immersed in water. In addition, he has to be without clothes and without objects that obstructs direct contact with water. In other words, he has to be totally naked for his purification to be valid. From this verse, we also deduce that the size of the mikveh has to be large enough for a man to fit his whole body into it. The Talmud states that it has to be 40 shei, which corresponds to about 700 liters, about 25 cubic feet. In the preceding verses, the impurity produced by bodily discharge is discussed. This specifies the type of flow. He had a special rite of purification and only required tevilah in order to be purified. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 18. If a man lies with a woman and there is a mission of semen, they shall both bathe in water and remain unclean until evening. The only place where semen does not cause impurity is inside the woman, since it only causes ritual impurity when it touches the outer parts of a body. So the woman is not impure by her inner contact with the semen in the intimate relationship. It was said earlier that the man who emits semen is unclean because of it. But why does the woman become impure? Because she has a relationship with her husband. Rashi says that it is by a degree of sovereign. In other words, there is no logical explanation for why a woman should be impure by having a relationship when there is semen emission inside her. After 3 days, the semen is dead and no longer has the ability to procreate. Therefore, it does not produce impurity from the 4th day. It seems that the state of tame, ritual impurity, is produced in man by having some kind of contact with death. The dead human body is the main source of ritual impurity. Therefore, sexual intercourse has to do with death, since millions of sperm die without producing human life. The same thinking is behind a woman's menstruation. Because she has not become pregnant, that egg that was a potential child is expelled without a new life having been formed. This is, in a way, a contact with death and therefore produces ritual impurity in the woman. Diseases that affect reproductive system in men and women produce ritual impurity because they threaten the procreation of human life. The Elohim of Israel is the living Elohim and the Elohim of the living. That is why it is necessary to eliminate all contact with death in connection with the worship of Him in the tabernacle. It is of the same understanding with respect of the previous verse. Leviticus chapter 15 verse 19 says, "When a woman has an issue, if the discharge in her body is blood, she shall remain in her state of menstrual uncleanness for 7 days, and whoever touches it will be unclean until evening." In verses 19 through 24 are the instructions regarding the woman during her state of monthly separation. In Hebrew, it's called nidah. This verse says that the nidah time is 7 days. The first day is counted when she begins to stain with blood. Regardless of the time of day when this occurs, that day is counted as the first day, even if there were only a few minutes left until sunset. So the day of the blood flows begins is counted as a whole day. Then she counts the day until she reaches the end of the 7th day, shortly before sunset. She then immerses herself in a mikveh to purify herself, and at sunset is ritually purified and will be able to join her husband again during the night of the 8th day. This is what the Torah teaches. In addition to this, the rabbis have made a fence of protection around this commandment and added 7 days after the last day of flow. The person who touches a nidah woman is ritually unclean and will not be able to enter the temple or eat of the consecrated things or sacrifices on that day. Leviticus chapter 15 verse 24 says, "And if a man lies with her and her menstrual uncleanness stains him, he shall be unclean for 7 days, and every bed on which he lies shall be unclean." The Torah forbids Jews from having marital relations during the time of the nidah, as it is written in Leviticus chapter 18 verse 19, which says, "And thou shalt not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness during her menstrual uncleanness." In Leviticus chapter 20 verse 18, it is written, if anyone lies with a menstruating woman and uncovers her nakedness, he has uncovered her discharge, and she has exposed the flow of her blood. Therefore, both shall be cut off from among their people. In Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 5 through 6, it is written, but the man who is righteous and practices justice and righteousness, and does not eat in the holy place of the mountains, nor lift up his eyes to the idols of the house of Israel, nor defile his neighbor's wife, nor approach a woman during her menstruation. And Ezekiel 22:10 says, in you the nakedness of the father has been revealed. In you they have humbled her who was unclean because of her menstruation. How is it possible that Leviticus 15:24 speaks of a man being able to lie with a woman in such a way that his menstrual impurity stains him if it is forbidden to have intercourse during the 7 days of the woman's nidah? The logical explanation is that here it is not a matter of the man sleeping with his wife during the week of nidah, but just at the beginning of the week. Without realizing it, they had a relationship by mistake, just as their flow began. In that case, the man is unclean for a week, as is the woman. In the other case, both are punished by the penalty of karet, cutting off the person from its divine root, and spiritual death. In the previous verses, we spoke about the bodily flows of men. From this point on, we speak of those of women. The woman's menstrual state causes ritual impurity in her, which was imputed to the one who touched her. The word used here is nidah, right? From the Strong's number 5079, which means unclean, menstruating, separate. A complete study of the law or the laws of nidah was related in the final part of the previous parashat. Let us go into Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25. If a woman has an issue of blood for many days outside the period of her menstrual uncleanness, or if she has an issue after that period, all the days of her unclean discharge will continue as in the days of her menstrual uncleanness. It is unclean. Now the Torah deals with zavah, which is a different case from normal menstruation. It is about having blood flow outside the 7 days of nidah. In the event that the woman bleeds 1 or 2 more days, in total 8 or 9 days, she does not pass into the state of zavah, because it is written for many days outside the period of separation. There needs to be at least 3 days of flow outside of the menstrual period to be considered many days. When this abnormal blood flow is limited to 1 or 2 days, she may bathe the day after the flow and wait until the afternoon. If there is no flow in the afternoon, she becomes pure and can be reunited with her husband. It could be that the flow of menstruation lasts 3 days out of the 7 days, or it could be that there is flow for 3 days. For 3 days or more, right? In the period of the first 11 days after the 7 days of nidah. In these cases, she will enter the state of zavah and will need to have a period of 7 clean days in order to become ritually pure. At the end of the 7 clean days, she immerses herself into the mikveh, and at sunset she is pure. On the 8th day, he will need to present sacrifices in the temple for his atonement. just like the man when he is cleansed from his state of Zav, as we have already seen in Leviticus chapter 15, verses 2 through 15. The rabbis have unified the laws of the two cases of Nidah and Zabah for reasons of protection of the people. They have made a fence of protection around the Torah because of the dangers of confusion in the application of these prescriptions and because of the severity of the penalty of karet in the case of their violation. Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher writes, when the hardship of exile increased, when tribulations multiplied and hearts were again afflicted, the sages feared that errors might occur in the reckoning of the days considered as pure, while in reality they were unclean. Now, as any error in this aspect can entail an isu karet, the penalty of severing, they decree in a general way that the slightest loss of impure blood requires, in order to return to the state of purity, that a period of 7 pure days be fulfilled prior to the immersion. This means that today halakha stipulates that after the last blood stain that occurs on a cloth used for inspection, 7 clean days, called the white week, must be counted. Furthermore, the Gemara says that the daughters of Israel took this rule upon themselves, which implies that they accepted it as obligatory. At the end of those 7 days, the woman immerses herself in the mikveh and then joins her husband after sunset. These rules make the period of separation longer than the Torah prescribes. The result of a longer period of abstinence and waiting results in a monthly renewal of sexual emotions. The Talmud quotes the words of Rabbi Meir as saying, why does the Torah command that the impurity of menstruation continue for 7 days? Because when the husband is in constant contact with his wife, he can develop a reluctance towards her. The Torah therefore commands, let her be unclean for 7 days so that she may be loved by her husband as the time she entered the bridal bed. The order of 1 white week after the normal flow of menstruation is based on the rules of Zavah. However, the result of a longer period of waiting after the Nidah time are beneficial to the marriage. The rules of purification for touching an unclean person or an unclean object do not apply today in the Jewish world because there is no temple. However, regulations regarding intimate relations are enforced by Jews, including White Week, but they are not obligatory for the sons of Noah. There are other rules for Jews not to touch each other between men and women and between spouses during the time of the Nidah, but they are not for reasons of ritual purity, but for reasons of moral purity and chastity. Leviticus chapter 18, verse 19. What then are the righteous of the nations to do in connection with these rules? Nature teaches us that it is not healthy to have intimate relations during the days when the wife is bleeding. Therefore, although it is not forbidden by the Torah, the sons of Noah do well to abstain during that time, which can last between 3 to 7 days. I also believe that those who wish to live at a higher level of holiness and have a healthier marriage should keep 7 days after the onset of menstruation, in the same way that the Torah stipulates for Jews. However, they do not need to lengthen the period with a white week unless there is a mutual agreement to lengthen the period so that they can devote themselves to prayer. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 5. Moreover, it is good that the righteous men and women of the nations should not touch you, as it is written in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1, where it says, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25. When a woman has had an issue of blood for many days outside the time of her uncleanness, or when she has an issue beyond her period of uncleanness, she shall be unclean as at the time of her uncleanness, as long as the discharge lasts. If a woman, due to some disease or hormonal activities out of the normal, had a flow, it was considered impure. An example of this is the woman, the one Yahshua healed of this disease. We see this in AliYAH, the book of Matthew, chapter 9, verse 20, where he says, and when a woman who had been suffering from an issue of blood for 12 years came up to him from behind and touched the hem of his garment. We believe this was the tzitziot, as what they accustomed to wear at that time. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 19. When a woman has an issue, the discharge in her body is blood, she shall remain in her menstrual uncleanness for 7 days, and anyone who touches her shall be unclean until evening. So how many days do abstinence last during monthly purification? According to the Torah, a woman is ritually unclean for 7 days from the first day of menstrual flow. In the count, the first day must be included as one. One day ends and the next begins after sunset, when 3 stars are seen in a cloudless sky. On the first night after 7 days, she is clean and will be able to join her husband again. As far as I know, the obligation of the mikveh, ritual bath, was added later in Jewish tradition. I am convinced that the law of the 7 days also applies to all the redeemed among the nations, and must be respected by all disciples of the Messiah who are not Jews. Jewish law is stricter than the Torah, because the rabbis have put a fence of protection over 2 very similar commandments, so that the people do not sin by mistake. That is why there is a synthesis between the normal week of menstrual, verse 19, and an abnormal situation of flow outside of normal times, verses 25 to 30. Therefore, Jews have to do a longer count every month. According to Jewish law, you have to start counting 7 days from the day when no more blood comes out of the menstrual period. After that, it's called a white week. The couples has the permission and obligation to get together again after the woman has immersed herself in a mikveh. It is a good rule not to touch your wife during the days of her monthly purification. It produces a good result both in character and in emotions. I recommend it for everyone. So may the Eternal give each couple among us this discipline and love to live at a high level of holiness for his holy glory and for the blessings of family. Everything counts in the eyes of Elohim. 7 AliYAH, Leviticus chapter 15, verse 29 through 33. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 31 says, you shall put the Israelites on guard against their uncleanness, lest they die by their filthiness, when they defile my dwelling place which is among them. The warning was clear. These flows were due to the death of microorganism in the person and contact with death produced the impurity. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is so holy that he does not allow the slightest impurity in his dwelling. Anyone who was unclean and approached the Mishkan, which is the tabernacle, would die instantly. That is why the Eternal warns the people to be responsible with being alert and on guard against everything that can generate impurities. Thus, you shall keep the children of Israel, Leviticus chapter 15, verse 31. You shall keep them, the children of Israel, separate from their uncleanness, that they may not die in their uncleanness, because you have defiled my tabernacle, which is among them. So the question is, are there different types of impurity? There are three types of impurity. You have the moral, the ritual, and the physical. Ritual impurity is the one that first affects the relationship with the tabernacle, Mishkan. Although we can find some relationship between these three types of impurity, it is important to separate them so as not to get confused. The laws that speak of separating from uncleanness because of the tabernacle deal with ritual uncleanness. This means that the prohibition for the children of Israel to eat unclean animals is not related to hygiene. Although it has a lot to do with it. It is not because impure meats have ingredients harmful to health that the Eternal forbids them for his priestly nation. No. These meats may have ingredients that are harmful to the health, but that's not why they're banned. Nor is it because the flow of the reproductive system is dangerous to health that the Torah establishes its regulations, but because that flow produces ritual impurity. The children of Israel had to separate themselves from ritual impurity so that their lives will not be endangered by the presence of the tabernacle that was among them. Our master does not speak of ritual impurity, but of moral impurity in his discourse on food in the book of Mark, chapter 7, verse 15 through 23, where it is written, "There is nothing outside a man that can defile him in entering him, but that which comes out of him, that is what defiles man. He who has ears to hear, let him understand." As Yahshua entered the house, separated from the crowd, his disciples asked him about that parable. And he said to them, "Are you also slow to understand? Do they not understand that nothing that enters man from outside can contaminate him? For it does not enter his heart, but into his stomach, and is expelled by the evacuation which cleanses all the food. That which proceeds from man, this is what defiles man. For from within, from the heart of man, come evil thoughts, adultery, fornication, theft, murder, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, envious, blasphemy, vainglory, and folly. All these evils come from within and defile the man. So, may the Eternal help us understand the difference between these three forms of impurity and its purposes. In this parasha appears commandments 173 to 183 of the 633 commandments. Commandment 173 is that purification of the condition of tzara must be done by certain specific components. Leviticus chapter 14, verse 2. 174, the commandment of the individual who had tzara, the Metzora, to shave his whole body on the seventh day of his purification. Leviticus chapter 14, verse 9. The precept to immerse oneself in a mikveh when an individual is in a state of impurity. Leviticus chapter 14, verse 9. A commandment to an individual who had an infection with sarat, the Metzora, right? To offer an offering when he completes his purification. Leviticus chapter 14, verse 10. Number 177, commandment to declare a house affected by sarat unclean. Leviticus chapter 14, verse 35. 178, precept that a man with an emission of his sexual organ is unclean. Leviticus chapter 15, verses 2 and 3. 179, commandment for the man who had an emission from his sexual organ to bring an offering after he had been healed. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 13 and 14. Number 180, precept that a man with seminal emission is unclean. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 16. 181, precept that a woman with menstrual discharge is unclean. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 19. 182, precept that a woman with an issue, zavah, is unclean. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25. And lastly, 183, commandment for a woman with an issue, zavah, to offer an offering after being healed of her discharge. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 28 through 29. And this concludes the 6th and 7th AliYAH from Parashat Tzaria and Metzora. We thank you, and may you all have a shalom and blessed Shavua Tov. Hallelujah. A good week. Hallelujah.
Father in heaven.